Thank you very much for inviting me this morning. It's good to be here. Clearly we understand the benefits of adaptive licensing as regards meeting the needs of patients through enabling earlier access to medicines. Secondly, we believe this could increase the efficiency of the drug development process. One of the biggest challenges facing the industry at the moment is escalating R&D costs and the sort of issues that's creating in terms of the affordability of medicines in society. One of the fixed, immovable forces seems to have been those R&D costs. They are increasing dramatically. We believe this offers a potential to bring those costs down by getting access earlier on and collecting data earlier on during the regulatory process. Another issue here, particularly for the SMEs, is adaptive licensing and potentially EAMS, early access to medicines, gets money coming back to the research and discovery process quicker than it would do otherwise, which is particularly beneficiary for the smaller companies operating in the UK, which so much of the lifeblood that George referred to earlier being critical. Obviously, adaptive licensing and early access can also provide better evidence of value and potential for savings in healthcare as well, and we shouldn't underestimate the potential for collecting value data earlier on. Now, the UK has various advantages in terms of its positioning in terms of this very issue. Since 2011, the coalition government has had a life science strategy that reflected a continuation of the previous Labour government. And whatever happens in the next election, as George and I have spoken about, we must make sure we maintain the infrastructure around the life science sector in the UK, of which this is one very important issue. The MHRA is probably within the EU one of the most progressive agencies. EAMS was launched in April this year. In September 2014, a vaccine was awarded the first PIM designation for EAMS, a cancer vaccine. And also there is an innovation office in the MHRA to help navigate through the regulatory system and the process. That's pretty unique, that innovation office, and also how it's externally facing. There are clear advantages to EMA being based in the UK, advantages that we often don't talk about, but one that is very prevalent. I think it also will mean EMA being based here means that the MHRA will be front of the issues. The other area that sometimes gets a bad press is that of NICE. NICE clearly, love it or hate it, fulfills a very important role for the UK NHS. It also has demonstrated through its increased flexibility, its ability to, if you like, to respond to data earlier on. And obviously we believe as an industry we can collect some of that value data earlier on than previously considered. I do feel at some point there will be some sort of merge between the three processes, if you like, of quality, safety and efficacy and valuation, and the UK will be ideally positioned to benefit from that. Now, there are a lot of risks from the industry perspective. Firstly, and very clearly, we've made it apparent that we are concerned about the lack of funding for early access to medicines. We think it's a great scheme, but it somewhat sends an odd signal out there that there's no funding or money available to that. We know there'll be a review year on from the launch of EAMS, and I think that's one issue we need to look at quite carefully, particularly for the small and medium-sized enterprises who don't have a lot of backstop in terms of cash to support these issues. There also needs to be some clarity in terms of the NHS funding for EAMS once medicines have been licensed. We know the NHS is under huge pressure, and yet we see some signals coming out most recently on excess treatment costs that are quite worrying as regards the NHS attitude towards research and development. Timing is critical. We have to get that right, and the timing of the first patient access is critical in terms of going through EU approval as well and making sure that's aligned. Now, without doubt, patient safety is critical and something that we cannot overlook. It has to be at the heart of the decisions we make. Now, there is a risk of spurious or equivocal safety signals being sent on the basis of early access or adaptive licensing that needs to be contextualised and understood in partnership with the regulator. The other question that needs to be thrown out to the industry as a whole is, are we too risk averse? We have been accused of that, and I think at times we are. We play within the regulatory boundaries quite carefully. Thalidomide taught us lots of serious lessons a long, long while ago, and as a consequence of that, we have very strict regulatory operations that we work within, and that's important. And that has also led to a lot of risk aversion within the industry, and we need to challenge and address that ourselves. And I think that's true for all the industry, whether big, small or large, small, medium or large. Now, in terms of the NHS itself, there is a lot of changes going on, particularly with NHS England. It's much clearer in the devolved nations, but with NHS England, there are some very unclear signals coming out, particularly through commissioning, through evaluation, collecting data within the system that we can then use further as an industry. There needs to be greater system alignment to make sure there's greater coherence in the way the system operates to minimise impediments to access of current medicines, which we struggle with. So therefore I would challenge how we're going to make sure the NHS works with an adaptive or an early access framework. There is also some institutional inhibitions within the NHS itself. If the industry is considered risk averse, I think the NHS is more risk averse, given its sort of historical adoption of innovation and its unwillingness at times to try things that are new. So how do we manage and manoeuvre through that? In terms of exit strategy, this is fundamental, is how can you exit from free provision of medicines under current EAMS guidance into actual commercial reimbursement to recover some of that significant investment in research and development. Obviously, other issues include transparency of information around PIMS designations. As an industry, we've moved very dramatically over the course of the past 2 years as regards data disclosure. So data that's summary data sent to the regulator is now disclosed as a matter of course, and all the industry is aligned behind that under the Code of Practice on Disclosure. The question we have to say, how does EAMS and how does adaptive licence sit in the data transparency debate? It's something we need to work around. The other issue of complexity in the UK is application in the devolved nations, which have very different healthcare systems and different approaches. Now, data is critical, as we know. Value-based assessments will evolve as evidence accumulates, but how will that feed into pricing and reimbursement? What is the type of real-world evidence that regulators will be looking for, particularly on the pricing and reimbursement side as well? And candidly, is the NHS capable of collecting that data? Who will pay for it, the industry or the NHS? The patient has to be at the heart of what we're considering. And what we need to make sure is that we encourage patients and patient organisations to pull through these innovations. I'm nervous about the SARCHI bill going through because of the many issues it raises, very nervous about it, but we're talking about a different issue today. What we need to do is motivate and encourage patients to pull through the changes. Care.data taught us some salutary lessons, I think, that we cannot assume patients will be involved and will seek to trust us. The opt-in or opt-out is a question that we have to consider very hard. And we need to learn from that is that people will not be taught by a leaflet that comes through their door. They want to be encouraged. Patient organisations need to be mobilised, as do leaders in all sorts of issues. Now, the question is, of course, is the patient prepared to take the risk? Often patients who have no alternative are not prepared to take the risk. We need to understand that. People do come to terms with the end of life, and medicines do not offer a solution for everything. What we do have here is an opportunity to learn more with willing patients who want to cooperate. So we need to clear the need for increased flexibility of medicines licensing to improve efficiency. And we also need to be sure that we have patient safety right at the heart. My industry needs to challenge its conservative approach to this and address some of its risk concerns. And we are committed to playing a leading part in taking this debate forward. And I thank you.